20 years ago this week, on February 24th, 2005, in the early morning hours in a quiet mobile home community in Homosassa, Florida, a 9-year-old girl vanished from her bedroom while her family slept just down the hall. What followed would become one of the most heartbreaking cases in American history, a 23-day nightmare that gripped a nation and ultimately forced 42 states to completely rewrite their laws protecting children from sexual predators. Her name was Jessica Marie Lunsford. She was 9 years old, and her story, as devastating as it is, would spark a revolution in how America protects its most vulnerable citizens. Before we begin this important story, I want to ask you to do something that might seem small but makes a tremendous difference. If you're new here, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. And if this story moves you, which I believe it will, leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Your engagement helps us continue telling these stories that matter, stories that deserve to be remembered. Now, this case requires something from all of us. It requires us to bear witness. Jessica Lunsford's story is not easy to hear, but it is essential that we hear it, because her legacy has protected millions of children across this nation. She deserves to be remembered not just for how she died, but for the extraordinary impact her short life continues to have on child safety in America. Homosassa, Florida, a small fishing town along Florida's Gulf Coast, approximately 76 miles west of Orlando and about 60 miles north of Tampa. It is the kind of place where neighbors know each other by name, where children ride bicycels through quiet streets, and where families feel safe enough to leave their doors unlocked. In a pale yellow double-wide mobile home on Sonata Avenue lived the Lunsford family. There was Mark Lunsford, a hard-working dump truck driver with tattoos, long hair, and a deep love for his Harley-Davidson motorcycle. There were his parents, Ruth and Archie Lunsford, longtime residents of Citrus County. And there was Mark's daughter, the light of everyone's life, Jessica Marie Lunsford. Jessica was born on October 6, 1995. By the time February 2005 arrived, she had just turned 9 years old and was thriving as a third grader at Homosassa Elementary School. Those who knew her described her with the same words over and over: spunky, bright, caring, and kind. Her grandmother Ruth would later say, "When God made Jessie, he made an angel." Jessica was what everyone called a daddy's girl. The bond between her and her father Mark was extraordinarily close. They had little games, playful battles about who loved whom more. Mark worked long hours in construction, laying asphalt and driving dump trucks, but every moment he could spare belonged to his daughter. One of their favorite activities was karaoke. Mark would take Jessica to a local establishment called the Saloon Bar and Grill on US 19, where this tiny 9-year-old would belt out songs by Pink and Shania Twain with all the confidence of a seasoned performer. She had dreams of becoming a singer, though like many children her age, her career aspirations changed frequently. Some days, she wanted to be an Olympic swimmer. Other days, a fashion designer. Jessica's bedroom was decorated in her favorite color, purple. The room was crowded with stuffed animals and dolls, her most treasured possessions. But one item stood above all the rest: a purple stuffed dolphin that her father had won for her at a state fair shortly before her disappearance. Jessica took that dolphin everywhere. She slept with it every night. She was also learning sign language, loved doing gymnastics and cartwheels in the yard, and was active in her church youth group called the King's Kids. At the time of her disappearance, she was memorizing Philippians chapter 4, verse 13. "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Her grandmother Ruth, who tucked her into bed every night, described her as cautious. Despite her outgoing personality, Jessica did not trust strangers easily. She never wandered far from home. She slept with a flashlight because she was afraid of the dark. Ruth would later say, "She never wandered far from home because she don't trust people." Jessica's mother, Angela Bryant, had divorced Mark when Jessica was approximately 1 year old. Mark was granted full custody, and Jessica grew up with her father and grandparents. Angela had moved to Ohio and remarried, and while she maintained that she tried to keep in contact, the relationship had grown distant. By 2005, it had been approximately 4 years since Jessica had seen her mother. But in that mobile home on Sonata Avenue, Jessica was surrounded by love. She had her father, who would do anything for her. She had her grandparents, who doted on her every need. She had her beloved pet dachshund named Corky. and she had her purple dolphin, her constant companion. None of them could have imagined that in the early morning hours of February 24th, 2005, a monster was watching from just 65 yards away. Wednesday, February 23rd, 2005, began like any other day for the Lunsford family. Jessica went to school at Homosassa Elementary, where she was a top student who loved learning. After school, she attended Bible class with her church youth group, the King's Kids. By approximately 9 o'clock that evening, Jessica was home. Her father Mark spent time with her as she got ready for bed. She had stepped out of the shower wearing a green towel and was preparing for the next school day. Her school clothes were neatly laid out, ready for the morning. At approximately 10 o'clock in the evening, Jessica's grandmother Ruth tucked her into bed, kissed her goodnight, and said her prayers with her. Jessica climbed under her covers in her pink nightgown and white shorts, clutching her purple dolphin, just as she did every night. The family dog, Corky, slept in Ruth's room. Sometime after Jessica went to sleep, Mark Lunsford made a decision he would regret for the rest of his life. He left to spend the night at his girlfriend's house. In his hurry, he forgot to lock the front door. At approximately 3 o'clock in the morning on February 24th, Jessica's grandfather Archie woke briefly to use the bathroom. He did not check on his granddaughter. He had no reason to. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But at that very moment, just 65 yards away, a man was descending from his bedroom window using a stepladder. His name was John Couey. He was 46 years old, and he was a registered sex offender with 24 prior arrests. Couey crossed the short distance between his half-sister's trailer on Snowbird Court and the Lunsford home on Sonata Avenue. Using a blade, he cut an L shape, approximately 6 inches by 6 inches, into the screen door. He found the sliding glass door unlocked. He entered the home. According to Couey's later statements, he had originally intended to burglarize the home. But when he saw Jessica sleeping in her purple bedroom, he acted on what he later described as impulse. He woke the sleeping child. He told her not to yell. He told her he was taking her to see her father. Jessica grabbed her purple dolphin and went with him. Jessica was carried across the yard to Couey's trailer, just 65 yards from her home. At approximately 5:45 the next morning, Mark Lunsford returned home to get ready for work. He went to turn off Jessica's alarm clock as he did every school day. Her bed was empty. Mark searched the house frantically. He checked every room, calling out for his daughter. He noticed the front door was unlocked, a terrible reminder of his oversight the night before. Jessica's purple dolphin was gone. Her nightgown and shorts were missing, but her school clothes remained neatly laid out. Her shoes were still by her bed. She had not left willingly to go somewhere. She had been taken. Ruth Lunsford called 911. By mid-morning, between 75 and 100 law enforcement officers had descended on the small community of Homosassa. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement was contacted. A nationwide missing child alert was issued. Sheriff Jeff Dawsey of the Citrus County Sheriff's Office immediately recognized this was no ordinary missing persons case. He would later say Jessica appeared to disappear in thin air. A 9-year-old girl does not simply vanish from her bedroom in the middle of the night without foul play being involved. Within 48 hours, more than 500 volunteers had gathered at Faith Baptist Church of Homosassa Springs to join the search. Deputies, helicopters, bloodhounds, and mounted posses were deployed. Dive teams searched nearby bodies of water. Canine units and canine search and rescue teams combed through dense vegetation. The weather did not cooperate. Volunteers braved fog, torrential rain, and even a tornado watch as they searched the thick forests and marshlands surrounding Jessica's home. They searched the vast Withlacoochee State Forest. They searched along US 19. Throughout the neighborhood, "Bring Jessica home" signs appeared. Candlelight vigils were held near the Lunsford residence. The entire community was mobilized in the desperate search for one little girl. But here is what makes this case so devastating. During those first critical hours and days, Jessica Lunsford was not far away. She was not in another county. She was not in another state. She was being held approximately 65 yards from her own home, in a bedroom closet, wondering when she would be allowed to go back to her family. To understand the full tragedy of Jessica Lunsford's disappearance, we need to understand the man who took her. And more importantly, we need to understand how a broken system allowed him to live just yards away from a 9-year-old girl, completely unmonitored. John Evander Couey was born on September 19, 1958, in Florida. By the age of 46, he had accumulated a criminal record spanning nearly 30 years, with 24 documented arrests. His record included arrests for burglary, indecent exposure, carrying a concealed weapon, driving under the influence, fraud, larceny, and drug violations. But it was his history of sexual offenses against children that should have kept him far away from any neighborhood where families lived. In 1978, when Couey was 20 years old, he burglarized a home in Citrus County. During that burglary, he entered a young girl's bedroom, placed his hand over her mouth, and kissed her. For this crime, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was paroled after just 2 years. In 1991, Couey was arrested in Kissimmee, Florida, for fondling a 5-year-old child. He was convicted of exposing himself to the young girl. Due to what authorities later described as more lenient laws at the time, Couey was released early. This pattern repeated itself throughout Couey's criminal career. He would offend. He would be arrested. He would receive a sentence. And then, almost inevitably, he would be released early. The criminal justice system had multiple opportunities to keep John Couey away from children. Each time it failed. Perhaps most disturbing is what happened in 2003 and 2004. John Couey, a registered sex offender, worked as a mason's helper at Crystal River Middle School from August 2003 to January 2004. He then worked at Homosassa Elementary School, the same school Jessica Lunsford attended, from January to April of 2004. He had direct contact with students and teachers. At the time, Florida had no requirement for background checks on subcontracted construction workers who worked on school grounds. A registered sex offender could walk the halls where children learned, and no one would ever know. One of Couey's former co-workers would later remark, "Up north, if you have anything on your record, you can't work at a school." By February 2005, John Couey was required to be registered as a sex offender in Florida. The law demanded that he keep authorities informed of his whereabouts at all times. If he moved, he was required to notify the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, known as FDLE, of his new address. He did not comply. The last time police verified Couey's address was August 27, 2004, 6 months before Jessica disappeared. His registered address was on Grover Cleveland Boulevard. But sometime after that verification, Couey moved. He moved to his half-sister Dorothy Dixon's trailer at 6647 West Snowbird Court in Homosassa, just around the corner from the Lunsford family. He never notified anyone. When Couey failed to report to his probation meetings, a warrant was issued for his arrest. But that warrant was, in the words of investigators, signed, dated, and filed along with thousands of others, virtually ignored by police. No one was actively looking for John Couey. At his half-sister's trailer, Couey lived in a back bedroom. He shared the residence with 5 other people: Dorothy Dixon, her boyfriend Matthew Dietrich, her daughter Maddie Secord, Maddie's husband Gene Secord, and Dorothy's 2-year-old grandson Joshua. According to Sheriff Jeff Dawsey, the adults in that trailer were heavy users of drugs and alcohol. He would later describe them as, quote, "a bunch of cracked-out individuals." Whether any of them knew what Couey did with Jessica Lunsford became one of the most controversial questions of the case. This is where the Jessica Lunsford case becomes almost unbearably tragic. In the immediate aftermath of Jessica's disappearance, Citrus County deputies conducted door-to-door interviews throughout the neighborhood. As standard protocol in missing children cases, they also began checking on registered sex offenders in the area. There were 208 sex offenders and predators registered in Citrus County at that time. More than 50 of them lived in the zip codes surrounding Jessica's home. During those first critical days, deputies came to Dorothy Dixon's trailer on Snowbird Court at least twice. Jessica Lunsford was inside that trailer. When deputies knocked on the door, Dorothy Dixon answered. Couey, according to later accounts, slipped out the back door of the trailer. The other residents told deputies that Couey was not living there. Deputies conducted a cursory check of the premises. They did not search thoroughly. They had no warrant. They had no reason, at that moment, to suspect that the missing girl was hidden just feet away. Jessica was in Couey's bedroom closet. She was alive. She was approximately 65 yards from her own bedroom, from her grandmother, who would have given anything to hold her, from her father, who was out there desperately searching. Later, in a lawsuit filed by Mark Lunsford, He would allege that police dogs had indicated in the direction of the Dixon trailer during the search, but were not followed up on. Whether or not this is true, the fact remains. Jessica was there, and the opportunity to save her slipped away. On February 27, 2005, 3 days after the abduction, Couey made a decision that would seal Jessica's fate. Deputies had come to the trailer. The entire community was searching. Couey was frightened. According to his later confession, he told Jessica he was going to take her home. He convinced her to climb out his window. He told her to get into black plastic garbage bags so that no one would see him carrying her. He did not take her home. He took her to the back of the trailer. He buried her alive. Jessica Marie Lunsford died from asphyxiation, suffocating in those garbage bags in a hole approximately 2.5 feet deep. Her hands were bound with speaker wire. She was clutching her purple dolphin, the one her daddy had won for her. She was found later with 2 fingers poking through the garbage bags. She had tried to claw her way out. For nearly 3 weeks, Jessica Lunsford remained missing. The search continued, though after 5 days, authorities suspended the full-scale volunteer effort, expressing frustration that it had uncovered little evidence. Mark Lunsford made desperate appeals on national television. He appeared on Good Morning America and CBS's The Early Show. He made a special plea to truck drivers. Both he and his father were truckers, asking them to keep their eyes open for his daughter. A reward fund grew to $115,000. Former Atlanta Braves pitcher Mike Hampton, a Homosassa resident whose son was Jessica's classmate, contributed $25,000. More than 2,000 tips poured in. None of them led to Jessica. Meanwhile, investigators were methodically working their way through the list of local sex offenders. During this process, they discovered something critical. John Couey, a registered sex offender with a history of crimes against children, was not at his registered address. He had failed to notify authorities that he had moved. Further investigation revealed that Couey had been living with his half-sister Dorothy Dixon on West Snowbird Court, just 65 yards from Jessica Lunsford's home. Sheriff Dawsey would later recall the moment Couey's name surfaced. It was like, boom. By March 4th, 9 days after the abduction, Couey knew that investigators were closing in. He obtained a one-way bus ticket, using money given to him by his half-sister Dorothy Dixon, and fled to Savannah, Georgia. On March 12, 2005, the Citrus County Sheriff's Office requested that Savannah, Georgia police locate and interview Couey. He was found. He was read his Miranda rights. He denied any knowledge of Jessica Lunsford, and then he was released. The warrant for Couey's arrest was only for local cannabis possession, not a crime that would allow extradition from another state. Savannah police had no grounds to hold him. After questioning, Couey fled again, this time to Augusta, Georgia. March 14, 2005. While Couey was on the run in Georgia, investigators returned to the Dixon trailer on Snowbird Court. This time, Dorothy Dixon gave the Citrus County Sheriff's Office permission to search the residence. Crime scene technician Martin Canaday processed Couey's bedroom. What he found would break the case wide open. In Couey's closet, investigators discovered a blood-stained mattress. There were blood-stained pillows. Forensic analysis would reveal that the stains contained the DNA of both John Couey and Jessica Lunsford. Jessica's fingerprints were found inside that closet. Her blood was found on the closet door. On March 15th, Sheriff Dawsey announced that they had a person of interest, a registered sex offender with ties to the area. A nationwide warrant was issued for Couey's arrest. He would not be free for long. March 17, 2005. St. Patrick's Day. Richmond County Sheriff's deputies in Augusta, Georgia, arrested John Couey less than 24 hours after the warrants were issued. He was cooperative. He was transported to the Richmond County Sheriff's Office for questioning. 2 Citrus County detectives, Scott Grace and Gary Atchison, traveled to Georgia to interview their suspect. What followed would become one of the most controversial interrogations in Florida legal history. In a small, windowless room, Couey initially denied any involvement in Jessica's disappearance. But as investigators pressed him, something changed. They told him about the blood evidence found in his bedroom. They suggested he take a polygraph test. During the conversation about the polygraph, Couey asked for a lawyer. He asked repeatedly, according to later court documents, no less than 8 times in 46 seconds. The detectives continued questioning. On March 18th, Couey agreed to take the polygraph test. When it was over, before anyone could tell him the results, He said something that would haunt everyone who heard it. "You don't need to tell me the results. I already know what they are. Could I have the investigators come back in?" When Detectives Grace and Atchison re-entered the room, Couey apologized for wasting their time. And then he confessed. He admitted to abducting Jessica from her bedroom. He admitted to holding her in his closet for 3 days. He admitted to sexually assaulting her. And he admitted to burying her alive when he feared the police were closing in. He told investigators exactly where they could find her body. On the evening of March 18th, under the glare of floodlights, Citrus County investigators began a 5-hour search of the property behind the Dixon trailer on Snowbird Court. At approximately 3:30 in the morning on March 19th, 2005, 23 days after she disappeared, Jessica Marie Lunsford was found. Her body was unearthed from a shallow grave approximately 2.5 feet deep, covered with leaves. She was wrapped in 2 black plastic garbage bags. Her hands were bound with speaker wire, wrapped and knotted around her tiny wrists. She was still clutching her purple dolphin. The medical examiner would later determine that Jessica died from asphyxiation, suffocation from lack of oxygen in the bags. She would have lost consciousness within approximately 90 seconds and died within 1 to 5 minutes. There was evidence that she had tried to free herself. 2 of her fingers had poked through the garbage bags before she suffocated. She was found approximately 150 yards from her own bedroom. That morning, Mark Lunsford spoke to the press. His words would become one of the most remembered statements of this entire tragedy. "Everyone heard me say, time after time, that she would be home. She's home now." Following his confession, Couey was charged by indictment with first-degree murder by asphyxiation, burglary of a dwelling with battery, kidnapping of a child under 13 with intent to commit sexual battery, and capital sexual battery on a child under 12. The state of Florida filed its notice to seek the death penalty. But the path to justice would not be straightforward. On June 30th, 2006, Circuit Judge Richard Howard made a ruling that shocked many observers. He ruled that Couey's videotaped confession was inadmissible. The reason? During the interrogation, Couey had asked for a lawyer multiple times. The detectives had continued questioning him anyway. This, Judge Howard ruled, was a violation of Couey's Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights. The judge stated, "It is not a mere technicality. It is a material and profound violation of one of the most bedrock principles of criminal law." The penalty phase began on March 13th. The prosecution presented aggravating factors. The murder was committed during a sexual battery and kidnapping. The victim was a child under 12. Couey had prior convictions for violent felonies, and the crime was especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel. The defense presented mitigating factors. They argued that Couey had a low IQ. Testing showed scores ranging from 64 to 78, near the threshold for intellectual disability. They described an abused and neglected childhood. They pointed to chronic substance abuse and mental illness. After approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes of deliberation, the jury voted 10-2 to recommend the death penalty. On August 24, 2007, in Inverness, Florida, Circuit Judge Richard Howard formally sentenced John Evander Couey. Death by lethal injection, plus 3 consecutive life sentences for kidnapping, burglary, and sexual battery. The judge described the horror of Jessica's final moments. He caused a slow, suffering, cautious death. Jessica was placed not in 1, but 2 trash bags. She was alive when he started to shovel the dirt over her body. His actions crushed the very breath and life out of Jessica Marie Lunsford. The judge described the dirt found under Jessica's fingernails and the holes poked in the garbage bags as evidence of her desperate effort to free herself. He noted that she may have been alive for up to 5 minutes before suffocating. He said the aggravating factors vastly outweighed the mitigating factors. Mark Lunsford addressed his daughter's killer directly. "I hope you hear her cry as you try to sleep at night. I hope you see the tears at night when she asked you if she could go home. You will never hurt another child again." Under Florida law, Couey's death sentence triggered an automatic appeal to the Florida Supreme Court. The case was scheduled for oral arguments on November 3, 2009. John Evander Couey would never see that day in court. On September 30, 2009, at 11:15 in the morning, John Evander Couey died at Memorial Hospital in Jacksonville. The cause of death was anal cancer. He was 51 years old. He had spent the last years of his life on death row at Florida State Prison in Rayford. Ruth Lunsford, Jessica's grandmother, learned of Couey's death and responded with characteristic directness. "He murdered my granddaughter. He didn't show any mercy to my granddaughter. God took control of it. He took him out of this world. I'm not crying, honey. If my legs and feet would hold up, I'd go out and shout all over Citrus County." Sheriff Jeff Dawsey, who had led the investigation from the beginning, expressed mixed feelings. "I really wanted the state of Florida to put John Couey to death. I wanted to be there to look into his eyes when they administered the serum. I guess this is nature taking its course. And I'm satisfied with that." Mark Lunsford, who had spent years advocating for stronger laws in his daughter's name, was philosophical. "I never dreamed it would happen like this. I never thought I would live long enough to see Couey put to death because of the lengthy appeals process." But Mark Lunsford's story did not end with his daughter's death or with Couey's conviction. In many ways, it was just beginning. Within weeks of Jessica's murder, Mark Lunsford transformed from a grieving father into one of America's most powerful child safety advocates. He was a man with a 10th grade education, a truck driver with tattooed arms and long hair. He had never spoken to legislators or testified before Congress. None of that mattered. He had something more powerful than any credential: a father's love and a father's rage. Mark Lunsford would later say, "Nothing's going to stop me. The worst thing that could ever happen to me in my entire life has happened. Nothing else is going to stop me. Nothing. No one. Nobody. Nothing." Mark Lunsford began traveling to state capitals across America, demanding that legislators strengthen laws protecting children from sexual predators. His message was simple and unwavering. "My crusade is mandatory sentencing, 25 years to life. If you sexually abuse a child or you molest a child, I firmly believe you don't have a right in society." He channeled his grief into action. He channeled his anger into advocacy. As he put it, "There's always going to be strength in anger." And legislators listened. On May 2, 2005, just 6 weeks after Jessica's body was discovered, Florida Governor Jeb Bush signed the Jessica Lunsford Act into law. The bill, formerly known as CS/CS/HB 1877, would take effect on September 1, 2005. Governor Bush stated, "Violent, sexual crimes against our innocent children are perhaps the most heinous imaginable. These added protections I sign into law today will provide law enforcement with the tools necessary to protect children from sexual offenders and predators." The law addressed every failure that had allowed John Couey to slip through the cracks and prey on Jessica Lunsford. First, mandatory minimum sentencing. The Jessica Lunsford Act required a 25-year mandatory minimum prison sentence for adults convicted of lewd or lascivious molestation against a victim under 12 years old. No early release. No parole. No exceptions. Second, lifetime electronic monitoring. The law required GPS tracking for convicted sex offenders. If John Couey had been wearing an ankle monitor, authorities would have known the moment he left his registered address and approached the Lunsford home. Third, stricter registration requirements. Sexual predators and offenders would now be required to report in person twice a year to the sheriff's office in their county of residence. Failure to comply would be a felony. Fourth, mandatory background checks. The law required criminal background screening, including fingerprinting, for all non-instructional school employees and contractors with access to school grounds when students were present. Never again would a registered sex offender be able to work in a Florida school without being detected. Fifth, criminal penalties for those who harbor offenders. It became a criminal offense to assist, harbor, or conceal a sexual predator or offender who fails to register. Florida was just the beginning. Mark Lunsford took his crusade nationwide. He visited state capitals. He testified before legislative committees. He told Jessica's story over and over, demanding that other states follow Florida's example. And they did. Within months, states across America began introducing what became known as Jessica's Law. The provisions varied from state to state, but the core principles remained the same: longer sentences, stricter registration, and electronic monitoring for sex offenders who prey on children. In November 2006, California voters passed Proposition 83, their version of Jessica's Law, with 70% approval. The measure included 2,000-foot residency restrictions, preventing sex offenders from living near schools or parks. Texas passed HB 8 in 2007, establishing sentences of 25 to 99 years, or life, for aggravated sexual assault of a child. Oregon amended its existing laws to include a 25-year mandatory minimum. Utah, Connecticut, Louisiana, state after state fell in line. Not everyone wanted strong legislation. In Washington state, when legislators proposed a weaker version of the bill, Mark Lunsford made his position clear. With all due respect, sir, please do not name this bill after my daughter. By 2008, at least 42 states had introduced legislation based on the Jessica Lunsford Act. By 2015, Mark Lunsford reported that 47 states had some version of the law on their books. The little girl from Homosassa, Florida, had changed the legal landscape of an entire nation. The impact of Jessica Lunsford's case extended beyond state legislatures. It reached the halls of Congress. On April 6, 2005, just weeks after Jessica's body was found, Congresswoman Ginny Brown Wade of Florida introduced the federal Jessica Lunsford Act, House Resolution 1505. The bill garnered 107 co-sponsors. Although that specific bill did not pass, its provisions were incorporated into a broader piece of legislation, the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act of 2006. President George W. Bush signed the law on July 27, 2006, the 25th anniversary of Adam Walsh's abduction. Jessica Lunsford was specifically named in the law. Section 631 established the Jessica Lunsford Address Verification Grant Program to help states verify sex offender residences. Section 621 authorized Jessica Lunsford and Sarah Lund grants for electronic monitoring equipment. Mark Lunsford was among the victims' advocates who campaigned for the bill's passage, standing alongside John Walsh, Adam's father, who had become America's most famous crime victim advocate. The Adam Walsh Act created a three-tier sex offender classification system and a national searchable database of sex offenders. Today, the United States Marshals Service conducts annual compliance sweeps, called Operation Jessica, to verify that sex offenders are properly registered. The operation is named in Jessica Lunsford's honor. On February 24, 2025, the 20th anniversary of Jessica Lunsford's disappearance arrived. In Citrus County, Florida, her memory remains vivid. In Lecanto, Florida, a children's advocacy center called Jessie's Place continues to serve the community. Founded in 2006 and named in Jessica's memory, the nationally accredited facility serves approximately 500 children each year who have been victims of abuse or neglect. At Homosassa Elementary School, where Jessica was once a third grader, a memorial playground stands in her honor. A Tree of Life plaque hangs in the lobby of the Citrus County Sheriff's Office, with each leaf representing a group or department that helped in the search for Jessica. Sheriff David Vincent, who now leads the Citrus County Sheriff's Office, reflected on the case's lasting impact. Even after 20 years, the pain of losing Jessica remains fresh in our hearts. The Lunsford family suffered a cruel loss, and our community mourned alongside them. Jessica's case changed the way we approach child abductions, both here in Citrus County and across the nation. Mark Lunsford continues his advocacy work. In 2011, filmmaker Boaz Dvir released a documentary called Jessie's Dad, chronicling Mark's transformation from grieving father to national advocate. 20 years after losing his daughter, Mark Lunsford still speaks of her with love and longing. It's been 20 years, but grief lasts forever. And experiencing a loss of a child in the way that we lost her, those pains never go away. Grief is like an open wound, and when you're reminded of it, then it reopens and it hurts all over again. He also reflects, we live with her still. We still talk about things. Jessie used to do this, or Jessie used to like that. You always have stories of someone you lost. So what is Jessica Lunsford's legacy? It is not just a law, though the law bears her name. It is not just stricter sentences or GPS monitoring or background checks, though all of those exist because of her. Jessica's legacy is this: because she lived and because she died, millions of children across America are safer today. Because of Jessica's law, sex offenders in 42 states face mandatory minimum sentences of 25 years or more. Because of Jessica's law, convicted predators cannot hide. They are tracked by GPS, required to register in person multiple times a year, and their faces are posted in public databases for all to see. Because of Jessica's law, registered sex offenders cannot slip through the cracks and work in schools where children learn. Ernie Allen, president of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, stated, "The impacts of Jessica Lunsford's story have been huge. In our view, enormous good has come and thousands of children's lives are going to be saved because Jessica Lunsford lived." There have been criticisms of the law. Some argue that mandatory minimums remove judicial discretion. Some point out that residency restrictions have made it harder for sex offenders to find stable housing, which may actually make them harder to monitor. The California Supreme Court struck down blanket residency restrictions in 2015, though it upheld the law's core provisions. These are legitimate debates. Criminal justice policy is never simple. But here is what is not debatable. Jessica Lunsford mattered. Her life mattered. And her death led to changes that have protected countless children from predators who would have otherwise slipped through the cracks. Let us remember who Jessica Marie Lunsford was. She was 9 years old. She loved singing karaoke. Pink and Shania Twain were her favorites. She loved her purple stuffed dolphin and her dog named Corky. She was learning sign language. She was memorizing Bible verses for her youth group. She wanted to be an Olympic swimmer or a fashion designer or a singer, depending on the day. She was afraid of the dark, so she slept with a flashlight. She never wandered far from home because she did not trust strangers. She was perhaps the only 9-year-old who loved cleaning her room. She loved taking care of her father. When Mark was sick, she would make him oodles of noodles, ramen, because she wanted to help. Mark Lunsford would later recall, "The thing that she liked the most was taking care of me. She always felt like she always would. Sometimes I did too." Mark Lunsford still tells stories about his daughter, like the time she tried to make him breakfast and covered the entire kitchen in flour. When he asked what she was doing, she started to cry and said, "I'm fixing you breakfast." He still does not know what she was trying to make, but there was a lot of flour involved. These are the memories that matter. Not the horror of how Jessica died, but the joy of how she lived. Not the monster who took her, but the father who loved her and who transformed that love into a crusade that changed a nation. As Mark puts it, "It's a good feeling to know that Jessie is making a difference. Because I speak for her." What can we learn from Jessica Lunsford's case? First, we learn that systems fail. John Couey should never have been able to live 65 yards from a 9-year-old girl. He was a registered sex offender with 24 prior arrests and a documented history of crimes against children. The system knew about him. The system had multiple opportunities to keep track of him. The system failed. Second, we learn that legislation matters. The laws that existed before Jessica's death were inadequate. Sentences were too short. Monitoring was too lax. Registration requirements were too easy to evade. It took Jessica's death to change that. Third, we learn that one person can make a difference. Mark Lunsford was not a politician or a lawyer or an activist. He was a truck driver with a 10th grade education. But he refused to let his daughter's death be meaningless. He took his grief and his anger and his love, and he channeled them into action that changed laws in 42 states. Finally, we learn that we must remain vigilant. The laws exist now, but laws are only as effective as their enforcement. We must ensure that sex offenders are properly registered. We must ensure that background checks are actually conducted. We must ensure that when a child goes missing, every resource is deployed to find them. Because somewhere out there, right now, there is another John Couey. And somewhere out there, there is another Jessica. We owe it to her memory to protect them. On March 19, 2005, when Jessica Lunsford's body was finally discovered, her father Mark stood before the press and said words that have echoed through the years. "Everyone heard me say, time after time, that she would be home. She's home now. Jessica is home now. She rests in peace, remembered by a community, a state, and a nation that will never forget her." That is the story of Jessica Marie Lunsford, a 9-year-old girl from Homosassa, Florida, who loved karaoke and stuffed dolphins and her daddy more than anything in the world. A child who was taken from her family in the most horrific way imaginable, and a legacy that has protected millions of children across America. Her name is written into the law books of 42 states. Her face is remembered by everyone who knew her case. Her spirit lives on in the children's advocacy centers, the memorial playgrounds, and the countless children who are safer today because she lived. As Mark Lunsford said, She was loved by hundreds of people that didn't even know her. If this story has moved you, please take a moment to leave a comment below. Tell us what you were thinking. Share your thoughts on child safety legislation or on Jessica's legacy. Your comments help us know that these stories matter to you. And if you have not already, please subscribe to Buried Secret Media and hit the notification bell. We are committed to telling these important stories, stories of crime and justice, of tragedy and hope, of lives that mattered and legacies that endure. For Jessica Marie Lunsford, October 6, 1995 to February 27, 2005. 9 years old. May she rest in peace. And may her legacy continue to protect children for generations to come. Thank you for watching this documentary from Buried Secret Media. We know that stories like Jessica Lunsford's are difficult to hear. They force us to confront the darkness that exists in our world and the terrible things that can happen to innocent children. But we believe these stories must be told. We believe that Jessica deserves to be remembered. We believe that understanding what went wrong can help us prevent similar tragedies in the future. If you found value in this documentary, please consider doing 3 things. First, like this video. It takes just a second, and it helps more people discover these important stories. Second, leave a comment. Tell us what you think about Jessica's legacy and the laws that bear her name. We read every comment, and we appreciate every viewer who takes the time to engage with our content. Third, subscribe to Buried Secret Media if you have not already. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new documentary. We are committed to bringing you in-depth, respectful coverage of cases that matter. On behalf of everyone at Buried Secret Media, thank you for being here. Thank you for bearing witness to Jessica's story. Until next time. Her life was short, but her legacy is eternal. Because of Jessica, millions of children are safer today. She will never be forgotten.